Welcome back to None of the Above on this Thursday night. Economic inequality in America has changed over time. And over the last few years, these numbers continue to exacerbate and get worse. The wealth gap between America's wealthiest and poorest more than doubled between the years 1989 to 2016. That, according to research from Pew. And last year only proved to show the underlying existing inequalities. The COVID pandemic revealed how bad things could get if someone is unable to afford basic necessities, things like food, water, healthcare. While yes, the government did step in to offer those stimulus checks and provide a bit of a boost in the form of unemployment insurance, and local states worked to provide communities with food banks, it certainly was not enough. Millions of people across the country lost their jobs, still mortgage payments, and many are struggling to even put food on the table. To help bring urgency to this matter, a new initiative called Mayors for a Guaranteed Income was launched. The goal here, to come together to provide direct payments to Americans who need it the most. According to new polling, 55% of voters across the country support this very policy. And joining us now with more to break it all down, the former mayor of Stockton, California, Michael Tubbs, returning here to Cheddar News. Michael, thanks a lot for taking the time. Good to have you here as always. You started efforting this pilot program last year. Talk to us a bit more about what you and other advocates in the space have been able to achieve so far. And, you know, really, what was the genesis here? What did you see existing that made you say, we got to do something?
Well, it's exactly what you highlighted in the opening. The fact that we have more wealth inequality than even the Gilded Age, which we all recognize as a time of intense inequality that led to real structural issues for this country. So in 2017, we announced we're going to do a pilot in Stockton. 2019, we started. And then in 2020, after the Black Lives Matter protest, I approached several of my mayoral friends and said to be responsive to this moment of a COVID-19 pandemic, to people protesting in the streets, the violence of poverty and of structural violence, we have to form Mayors for a Guaranteed Income and really push the federal government to do what is necessary. And since then, we've seen the pendulum swing. When we started, only 45% of Americans supported guaranteed income. Today, it's 55% of all voters, including 75% of Democrats, including 53% of independents. And we have 25 pilots happening across this country. We have $35 million from Governor Newsom in California to support basic income programs. And next week, we have this child tax credit, which is essentially a federal guaranteed income to 90% of families. So we've done a lot of good work and a lot more work to do to make guaranteed income a reality and to just get rid of economic insecurity in this country.
Michael, talk to me about what this looks like. If I or the next person were a citizen of Stockton, California, either how can I apply? How do I find out whether or not a family is eligible? And what does that look like really for the community level? You speak to it very well from the perspective of the former mayor, but put yourself in the situation of one of your now former constituents. What does it actually look like to those men and women?
Well, I think from actual constituents, it looks like a real blessing if you're able to get the to be part of the programs, but they're pilots, so they're not yet at scale where you're able to help everyone. So I think that's the frustrating part, and that's why we're pushing for a policy. But for example, in California, we have the Golden State Stimulus, where every single Californian, even ITN filers who make $75K or less, will be given one $600 check. And then in communities like LA, Long Beach, if you live in a particular zip code or you meet certain requirements, you're able to be eligible to receive $500 a month or $1,000 a month. But the issue is that, to your point, it's not yet to everyone who needs it. And that's why we're saying we will pilot at a local level. But the goal is to get to a policy. The goal is for the federal government to put a law in place, much like the child tax credit, to make it so that every American who needs it has an income floor.
Ironically, the issue of mayors reminds me of the former presidential campaign for Andrew Yang, who, of course, I think Michael popularized this idea in the hearts and minds of a lot of Americans of a universal basic income. I think you and I have actually talked about UBI before. Andrew Yang just fell short in his bid to become the mayor of New York City. What did the Yang candidacy do, if anything? I mean, did that kind of change the conversation, over the course of the last 2 to 3 years? Was this something that you and other mayors had already been kind of, looking to get off the ground for quite some time, and Yang maybe kind of signal boosted it? Any kind of support there?
Yeah. Well, in Stockton, we announced our pilot in October 2017. So that was before my good friend Andrew Yang even announced he was running for president. But with that being said, the fact that he ran for president and then mayor of New York, speaking about guaranteed income, definitely helped elevate the conversation and to bring a lot of people to the fold. But when we talk about guaranteed income, we're talking about an idea that's as old as this country. Thomas Paine was talking about this. I learned about this from studying the National Welfare Rights Organization, Dr. King. But even Milton Friedman, Richard Nixon were talking about these ideas. So it's not a new idea, but it's an idea whose time has come, and we're seeing sort of political leaders like Andrew Yang, but also now 58 mayors from across this country who are saying we want to pilot this idea, we want to test this idea, and we want to make guaranteed income a reality.
Let's go back to Dr. King there, because you mentioned him a moment ago. Take us back there to the 1960s. What exactly was Dr. King saying in the spirit of this? How should we look at this? I mean, whether you're talking about restorative justice or trying to do right on behalf of Americans who are struggling, what was the message then, and how is it being reflected today?
Yeah, the message then is the message we're taking now. And it's this idea that America has the potential to be a truly great country, but a great country is measured by how it treats the least of these. And with so much wealth, when we have literally billionaires becoming centibillionaires during a pandemic when everyone else is losing everything, then it's morally reprehensible to allow for poverty. And a guaranteed income would abolish poverty and give everyone the agency to make decisions for themselves and their families, and also reflect what we know to be true in terms of the inherent dignity of all people. So much in that same tradition, the 58 mayors and others are saying we want to abolish poverty. We want a new social contract in this country, and we want to make sure that our country reflects what we say on paper, that all people are created equal, and because of that, they are entitled to dignity. And a big part of dignity comes with economic security.
I do want to ask you about the new child tax credit, beginning, of course, right around the corner, July 15th. Michael, as you know, I mean, all over the country, but especially here in Washington where I live and work, this has been something that people like Senator Michael Bennet, they've been talking about this for years, and now it's set to become a reality. What should people expect, and why, from your perspective as a former mayor of the community of Stockton, is this going to be such a needed lifeline to so many families?
First, let me just say, it is a huge deal. It is literally a guaranteed income for families. 90% of families were receiving checks every month, and the fight now is to make that permanent. And it's a big deal because we know people are struggling. We know that childcare is expensive. We know that people are working themselves to death, that people aren't able to afford housing, that people aren't able to pay off debts. We know that people just need an income floor. And this is a huge first step to unlocking the potential, the productivity of the American people. And the idea that we could cut child poverty in half is a huge one. And I think the corollary is, why would anyone be opposed to ending child poverty? Why would anyone be opposed to folks eating? Why would anyone be opposed to increased consumer spending? So it's a huge deal, but it's temporary. And now the fight is to make that permanent, make it so that if you have a child in America, you're given the income floor you need to be good parents and to show up for your kids in the ways that they need you to show up.
A nation is only as good and as strong as its most vulnerable citizens, and these are really important conversations about the things that elected officials and some former elected officials as well are trying to do on behalf of their constituents in need. Former Mayor of Stockton, California, Michael Tubbs. Michael, always good to have you taking the time to stop by Cheddar News. Thanks for being here. Coming up on the show, the rise of black-owned businesses during the COVID